consuming SOAP web services. Let's now talk about the SOAP end of Mule applications and what options are available to us. When talking about the consumption of SOAP web services, you've actually got two primary options inside of Mule in Anypoint Studio. Mule's SOAP support is based on Apache CXF, so a web service framework in Java for SOAP messaging. This handles all serialization and deserialization of the message. It also handles all SOAP envelope and namespace processing. The idea here is that the developer only has to see the POJO and not concern themselves as much with the packaging into a SOAP envelope, sending out to a server, repackaging, unpackaging, and so on. Now, when you're consuming SOAP web services, we first check and see if there's an existing Anypoint connector just like before. So starting off, if we're connecting to Salesforce, we go out, we see there's a Salesforce connector, we can use that. If there's not, but we still want to interact with this SOAP-based API, these are where our consuming options come into play. First off, we've got a great new tool called Web Service Consumer. Basically, what Web Service Consumer does is provides the location of the WSDL, or you provide the location of the WSDL to Web Service Consumer, and then the rest is configured for you. The host, the port, the address, all the available operations to choose from are available in a dropdown based on what the WSDL told Web Service Consumer is available. If you need a stronger feature set, you can also use a CXF component, also used to expose an endpoint as a SOAP service. So the CXF processor has the ability to expose SOAP services, but also consume them, in which you're actually controlling the object that gets passed to CXF and gets packaged into an envelope, and so on. Now, our primary focus is going to be on Web Service Consumer, as this is a great tool when you need to consume web services. So, in this next walkthrough, we're going to implement a fourth flow in our application, which is expose on 8081 Delta. We'll add Web Service Consumer to consume a SOAP web service for Delta flight information. And then finally, we'll use a DOM to XML transformer to display the SOAP response back to our particular client. Let's get started. Let's start off inside of a browser or tool such as Postman. I want to start off by accessing the WSDL that we're going to be working with. You'll be able to find the address for this in your student files in your snippets. For now, I'm going to put in localhost 8112 /essentials /delta $WSDL. So your path will look something similar to this, and I'll hit send. Now, upon sending a request out to get this WSDL, I can look through and I can see some different information, as again, this will describe what's going on. In particular, I can see some of the different elements that this works with. In particular, I can see that there is an element of find flight response, list all flights, and list all flight response as well. I can go into a particular type, such as flight, and see what those different fields are. See potentially whether it is compatible with being in a list, an array list of results coming back, and so on. So scrolling through this WSDL, I can get a lot of good information about what exactly is available. The operations, the service name, all of that good stuff is here for me to use. Great. So taking this a step further, let's flip into Anypoint Studio. And back in our existing project, what we're going to do here is we're going to set up that fourth flow to get Delta flights. So in between United and the banking account flow, we'll drag in an HTTP endpoint one more time. Again, before forgetting, let's go ahead and rename and call this the Get Delta Flights flow. And let's also select our HTTP endpoint, use our pre-existing HTTP listener, and specify a path of Delta, which is accessible through a GET request. Good deal. Now, taking a look at our application, what we want to do this time is we want to call a SOAP service. So one of the things that we'll notice if you look closely inside of that WSDL is the list all flights operation is essentially argumentless, meaning it really just needs to be hit from a web service standpoint. It doesn't need any data, and it will pass back all of the available flights in XML. So let's start off by bringing in a web service consumer element into the process phase of our flow. With Web Service Consumer brought in, we can now go into the connector configuration. Now, like most of our connector endpoints, this is one that needs a connector, a global connector to support it. So we're going to go in and add a new connector. And let's start off by specifying the WSDL location. If you do still happen to have the Postman or web browser open where you called the WSDL, you can simply copy this address that you used and then paste it inside of Studio. Once you paste it and either tab out or give Studio a second, it'll actually go out and receive that WSDL as long as it's accessible. It'll give you the service, the port, even the full address that it's been able to pick up from the service it went out and found. And what we'll do before hitting OK here is go ahead and name this. So let's call it the Delta Web Service Consumer and hit OK. Now, through introspecting that WSDL and setting up this global connector, we should now be able to look into the operation, and the Web Service Consumer is now aware of what operations are available to us inside of this flow. Pretty cool. So let's do the list all flights option, the one that currently takes no arguments. So next up, instead of just running this application, let's make sure we understand what's going on inside of it. Now, to do this, I'm going to have us put a logger at the end of this flow. So we'll drop in a logger. And one quick observation to make before we go any further is if you select your logger, one of the great things that Studio helps you out with is it provides you with this little metadata explorer. Now, I can go, as long as the logger is selected, and expand the metadata here and actually see what response, based on the WSDL, this logger is going to get inside of it. So think about the time when you're writing a Mule expression, you need to know what the data type is and what field you want to call and so on. This will contextually tell you what the processor is going to receive on the input phase. And you can even flip it to tell what's going to be responded on the output phase. Now, being just a logger, basically nothing will change, right? So the input and the output payloads are the same. Now let's run this in debug mode. So first we're going to right click on the logger and add a breakpoint on top of that logger. As usual, we'll click in the canvas and we'll save up our project entirely, along with running it in debug mode. Now, what we can do next is we can go ahead and make a request to this flow. So back in our HTTP tool or Postman, let's go ahead and make a call out to localhost 8081/Delta. Now, in making this request, since we're in debug mode, it's going to pend. Back inside of Studio, we'll see that our breakpoint has stopped the Mule message that's in flight. We can also open up here and see some information about that particular Mule message. So if I expand the payload, I can see that it is, expand this a little bit, of type namespace restore XML stream reader. Open up the reader, see some different information. So obviously it's in some type of stream format right now. So what's going to happen if we send this all the way through, which I encourage you to try right now, is we actually get an exception from our HTTP endpoint. Now in this case, what's happening is the stream's coming back from HTTP, and HTTP isn't necessarily finding a transformer to flip that back to the client. Now this is really easy for us to solve. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure our client gets XML back, and one of the really easy ways to do this is just to pop in a DOM to XML transformer. So we will go ahead and take this and pop it right in. No extra configuration is necessary here. What we can do now is click inside of our canvas, save our project. This time, let's just run it, since we're confident, hopefully, that it will not throw any exceptions, right? And we'll let it spin back up, let the console roll. Great. And last but not least, if we flip back into Postman, so back inside of Postman, we can make a request to this resource one more time, And in this case, we can see that localhost 8081 Delta went out to the web service, returned some XML back to us, and eventually we'll make some more advanced SOAP calls and transform the data coming out. But for the time being, this was an easy way for us to call a SOAP service and retrieve that XML payload back to our client.